Hello, coming to you from the feasting city of board gaming, Omaha, Nebraska. Welcome to the Out of the Dust podcast. I'm your host, Turkey Bryce, and tied in with a popular recurring Out of the Dust geek list on Board Game Geek. The Out of the Dust podcast is a bi-weekly podcast that is focused on re-exploring games we play that we hadn't previously played in a year or more. Why did the game get dusty? Why did you decide to dust it off? How does the game compare to how you remembered it? Are you likely to play it more often in the future? These are the questions that we're interested in examining on Out of the Dust. This week on the podcast, episode 77. On the Out of the Dust segment, I'll bring Mondo out of the dust and a contributor will dust off Alien City. On the reaction segment, I discuss a couple of interesting announcements from publisher Grail Games. On the What I've Been Playing segment, I review Warp's Edge. On the Obscure Bryce Games segment, I review Ratland. And we wrap up the episode by continuing a series of expansion reviews with Tapestry, Plans, and Ploys. I had a chance to bring Mondo out of the dust recently. Mondo is a 2011 world-building themed real-time tile-laying game for publisher Z-Man and designer Michael Schacht of Zularedo fame. I last played it 2 years, 7 months, and 9 days ago. My oldest son and I used to play this on occasion at the local board game cafe, and that was the occasion of our latest play. It wasn't a good fit with my youngest then, and we haven't played it in a while since he started tagging along. I've been thinking it might be good to try it again with him, but trips to the board game cafe have been naturally rare in pandemic world, especially with the family. So when I came across a copy for $5 on eBay, it was an easy decision to snatch it up. It's a Z-Man game, so naturally it's out of print and it's become quite rare and scarce. I was stoked to find a copy for this price. It didn't take long to arrive in the mail, and since I'd played it before, it was easy to get to the table right away with the family. My wife hadn't played it before and enjoyed it quite a bit. My oldest son did quite a bit better than he used to at the cafe. My youngest had fun putting tiles on his board and making a planet with cute animals on it. A little adjusted scoring for him, and he wound up with a respectable score. If my oldest is any indication, it may not take too long for him to not need the handicap, though. Mondo is one of those games that is just a fun time and should be taken too seriously anyway. And indeed, it was a fun time this time, and I'm glad the game is in my collection now because I think it will continue to have more fun times in store for us. Let's see what a contributor brought out of the dust. Carthoris Pyramidus, username Carthoris, brought the obscure Alien City out of the dust. Alien City is a 2002 self-published abstract strategy game from designer Michael Shoesau and uses translucent pyramids and glass beads as pieces. It appears to be the highest-ranked game on BGG that uses pieceback-style pieces, in fact. As the title suggests, the abstract theme tasks players to build a city in a sci-fi setting. Carthoris last played it 2 years, 11 months, and 21 days ago and currently rates it an 8 out of 10. He writes, "It had been a long while since our last play on this one, and we had 2 abortive misplays before finally getting some final scores. In the process, we got a much better handle on the game, and I'm eager to play it again soon. It's a surprisingly mean 2-player abstract. You construct a city where all features must stay connected by a single road network of open spaces, and each player claims 3 features to score over the course of the game. Scores multiply the number of approximate customers by the distance to the nearest competitor for pretty enormous potential variation. I'm anxious to play this one again soon, and I don't think it should gather dust the way it did last time." Thanks for the contribution, Carthoris. Alien City is not a game I was aware of the existence of, but it's got some sweet table presence, and I could see myself giving this a go if I ever run into anybody who has assembled a copy. Reaction segment time! This week on the reaction segment, I'm going to go over a couple of interesting recent Grail Games game release announcements. First up is the Yellow and Yangtze card game. Since Yellow and Yangtze is a re-implementation of Tigris and Euphrates, you might think this card game will naturally have something to do with either of those games. But no! The Yellow and Yangtze card game is actually a re-implementation of Great Wall of China, a small area control card game from 2006. So, this is pretty silly. I've played Great Wall of China, and I could tell you there is nothing in common between it and Yellow and Yangtze besides the China setting and the area control genre. I suspect there will be lots of people expecting one thing from this game and get something completely different. Now, I actually like Great Wall of China quite a bit, and in fact, it's one of my favorite Reiner Knizia games, so I think those who are open-minded will enjoy what they get. But there is some risk of disappointment from those who get blindsided by the lack of connection between Yellow and Yangtze board game and this alleged card game version. At the end of the day, while the concept of passing off a rethemed game as a card game implementation of a re-implemented game is pretty elaborate, I think it will ultimately be a good thing if more people get to enjoy the fun Great Wall of China mechanics in a new package. So I probably won't be picking up the Yellow and Yangtze card game myself, since I do already own Great Wall of China, but this second Grail game announcement is one I'll definitely be adding to my collection, and that is a reprint of Fjords, a long out-of-print Rio Grande Viking-themed game from designer Franz Benno Delange, who is best known for Container and Transamerica. Fjords is a well-respected tile-laying area enclosure game, and it's been on my wishlist for a long time. When I first started using BGG and compiling my wishlist, I added just about anything in the top 500 with mechanics I liked, and Fjords qualified for that requirement at the time, and has been on my wishlist ever since. So I'm envisioning a nice new addition for this game with lovely components and eye-catching table presence, and if Grail Games' past work is any indication, I won't be disappointed in these regards. I'm really looking forward to when this classic Euro game hits retailers again soon. This week on the What I've Been Playing segment, I'm going to tell you about Warp's Edge, the new solo Starfighter-themed bag-building game from publisher Renegade and designer Scott Almes. Both publisher and designer tend to be hit or miss for me, so this was a Kickstarter I took a very careful look at before ultimately pulling the trigger. I'm not a Tiny Epic fan, but Scott does come up with some interesting mechanics on occasion. I do like Loop Incorporated quite a bit, and I find some of Renegade's games lackluster and boring, like Passing Through Petra, though I appreciate the diversity of their lineup and find a lot of their games like Clank quite fun. So finally, the concept of a solo bag builder was enough for me to take a chance on the Kickstarter, and that wound up being fulfilled not too long ago. Did my decision pay off? Here's how it works. Players are a starfighter pilot stranded behind enemy lines and faced against incoming waves of enemy fighters and their mothership. Thematically, players are considered destroyed each time their bag of chips runs out, which represents them being overwhelmed by the enemy and running out of resources and knowledge. And then, resetting the chip bag represents warping back in time with greater resources and knowledge. But the player's time warp is only capable of so many resets, and if they can't destroy the mothership before a certain number of warps expire, then they are destroyed for good. The chips in the bag represent maneuvers players can perform against the enemies, the lasers they need to destroy them, and the energy required to gain additional chips for the bag, and special abilities unique to the player's chosen starfighter. At the beginning of the game, players select a mothership, each of which have a unique difficulty and abilities in turn, and also dictate how many of each level of enemy starfighter go into creating the enemy forces. Players will face off against 4 of these enemy forces each turn. Dealing partial damage to an enemy will stun it and prevent it from dealing damage this turn. Destroying it or outmaneuvering it will grant the player rewards and benefits, including extra chip draws or new, more powerful chips. Enemies that aren't stunned or destroyed deal damage to the player's starfighter, and if the starfighter is destroyed outright in this way, so too is their time warp, and the game ends in a loss that way as well. The only way to win is to meet the victory conditions presented by the selected mothership, usually needing to destroy it in some fashion requiring a unique combination of energy, maneuver, and laser tokens. Some people have complaints about a lot of fantasy settings feeling generic, but I think the same can be said for sci-fi settings as well. On the surface, Warp's Edge doesn't bring anything new to the table in that regard. The enemies consist of various kinds of sci-fi tropes like bugs, but the way the time warp is described feels like a fresh take on causality loops, and I really appreciate how this part of the game integrates so well with the bag building mechanics. That's cool! And the fact that I, as the player, are commanding a single starfighter instead of the typical galactic empire makes the game feel more personable than most games in the genre, which does help me form a stronger connection with the game itself. As for the mechanics, the bag building requires some careful and thoughtful decisions along the way, especially in the matter of manipulating timing, which chips to use right away and which to stash away for a future round, and where and how to best utilize those chips. Instead of placing chips on static worker placement spots, the game feels more active and engaging by using them against different combinations of enemies. The game is super challenging, even on the lower difficulty settings, so it's got that addicting feel to it that makes me come back for another effort. After inevitably failing against a boss the first try, I find myself carefully considering which starfighter I should have used instead, and how to approach my bag building differently next time. Thanks to a wide variety of bosses, enemies, and starfighters, there's a lot of replayability in the game, and despite already having one expansion, it seems like the sort of game tailor-made for more. I've gotten in quite a few plays of the game already, and I'm having a blast with it. I wouldn't be surprised if this makes my top 10 of the year list at this point, and potentially even ranked highly on that list. Obscure Bryce game segment time. This week on the segment, I'm going to tell you about Ratland, a 2017 worker placement game from publisher Eclipse Editorial, and first-time designer Eduardo Garcia Martin. This was a Kickstarter game that never got a North American retail release, which has made it a scarce game to try to acquire. I missed the Kickstarter and first became aware of the game when it appeared on the Essen release list a few years ago. The theme of building up a rat colony was very attractive to me and caught my attention. My wife is a big fan of rats, and we kept them as pets for several years when we first got married. Worker placement games almost always work out well for us, so this seemed like a no-brainer and surefire hit for us if I could find a copy. I've been keeping my eyes open ever since it fulfilled, and a copy just happened to show up for a reasonable price from a local seller's Facebook post just before Halloween. I scarfed it up and got it to the table right away. Here's how it works. Each player starts the game with a certain number of rats. These rats are both workers and points because whoever has the most at the end of the game wins. Like Dinosaur Island, this is the sort of worker placement game that involves a personal worker placement board, which players assign the rats to the various action spaces simultaneously behind a screen. At the beginning of each round, a cheese card is revealed that lets players know how much and what varieties of cheese are available at the dump, in the sewers, and in the city. There's an action space for each one of these locations, and the number of rats assigned to each one dictates how many pieces of cheese are selected blindly from a drawstring bag filled with the cheese listed on the cheese card. But cheese is selected in order from least amount of scavenging rats to the highest quantity, so players who assign too many rats to a potentially lucrative location risk not getting their full allotment. You've got to feed your workers, of course, and that's what the cheese is for. Tiers of rat quantities dictate how much cheese needs to be eaten, but for each cheese unable to be eaten, a rat starves to death and is worth -1 point at the end of the game. Black poison cheese and blue hallucinogenic cheese causes rats to require medical attention or wander off and become lost for a turn. Additional cheese can be gained by assigning rats as raiders to try to raid neighboring players' pantries of cheese, which players can assign rats to defend. And that just leaves the nursery, where the quantity of rats assigned create the same number of additional rats, which will need to be fed right away, but can start taking actions the following turns. An event deck tracks the number of rounds, and when the endgame event is revealed somewhere in the bottom half of the deck, the game immediately ends and rat points are tallied. It's a straightforward game and easily enough accessible that I was able to play it even with my youngest 6-year-old son. Both my kids love the tension and surprise of drawing cheese out of the bag, and they had a great time even though I won. It's tempting to try to get a bunch of rats every single turn, but I was impressed with how well the game keeps players in check from doing that by requiring plenty of cheese to keep the rats alive. Due to the pantry rating, there's a generous portion of Take That in the game, but a strategic Take That players can plan against by assigning just the right amount of defenders. The pace of the game is brisk, and the uncertainty of when the end-of-game event comes up keeps players guessing how many rats to assign and when, which is a nice risk-reward analysis element that is present for the entire course of the game. The game could be over in as few as 5 rounds, or in as many as 9, but that's a relatively small window to build up a thriving colony of rats with enough cheese to keep the clan going. This element creates some wonderful pressure amongst the players in the game and fosters a lot of really fun and rewarding moments in the game as players rejoice in a successful raid, or drawing out just the right kind of cheese they needed to meet their quota. All things considered, Ratland is a big family game success that I predict will see plenty of table time. I think I'll wind up bringing it to some of my game groups as well, because I think this game will also work for groups of cutthroat players too. This week I continue my review of 2020 expansions with Plans and Ploys, the new expansion for Tapestry from Stonemaier Games. Tapestry got some mixed reviews at first, but since its release it's become very popular and it's sitting just outside the top 200 on BGG right now, and still trending upwards. It's not nearly as controversial a game as some might lead you to believe, and any detractors at this point are plainly just a vocal minority. I'm a fan of the game myself, enjoying the anachronistic way the theme is approached, and have lots of fun figuring out ideal ways to take advantage of the various tracks with the civilization and tapestry cards I have to work with from game to game. My wife likes the game as well, and I think it runs really smoothly at 2 with no need for the optional automa. With all of that in mind, backing the new expansion was an easy choice, and it didn't take long to get it to the table at all, and my wife and I have played it several weekends in a row now, exploring the new civilizations the expansion offers. That's one of the main things the expansion offers up, 10 new civilizations to choose from. We've played with about half of them so far, and they all feel completely different than any of the base game ones so far. I'm also noticing a theme of the new civilizations utilizing lesser used elements of the base game. For example, the aliens, which are my favorite new expansion so far, start the game with space tiles, which is a fun part of the base game, but which sometimes never come into play at all. A plethora of new Tapestry cards almost doubles the size of that deck, really mixing that aspect of the game up and giving a generally more interesting selection to choose from. Tapestry cards were sometimes only circumstantially useful, but this new batch are all lots of fun. And of course there are some new buildings. For the first time, some of the new buildings interplay through Tapestry cards, which is a cool element. But now, every player starts the game with a personal landmark card that brings a unique landmark into play on their capital board after achieving some kind of objective. Ultimately, this is the sort of expansion that offers up more of what already exists for greater variability and replayability. Personally, I'm fine with that. That made the expansion really easy to integrate all at once and delivers on its objective to provide that greater variability promise. But if gamers were disappointed with the base game because of its mechanics or theme, the expansion is not likely to change their minds at all. There are no significant new gameplay elements here. The new landmark cards and Tapestry cards that bring buildings into play address some minor complaints some had about the capital board not always being important to develop. So if that element was holding you back, you'll appreciate the tweak the expansion offers in that regard. In fact, if one were to characterize this expansion as an expansion of tweaks, I think that would be an accurate assessment. It's not a major expansion. It's not going to go down in anyone's books as a game-changing or a revolutionary expansion. It's not an essential expansion either. But it accomplishes what it sets out to do, and if you're a Tapestry fan, it's worth picking up eventually. Well, that will do it for episode 77. Thanks for listening. Feel free to join the Out of the Desk Podcast Guild at BoardGameGeek.com. Follow the podcast on Twitter at OutofTheDeskBGG. Leave a comment at the Guild. PM me on BGG under user handle Radagast14, or user handle AndLeave14, or email me at Radagast14 at CenturyLink.net. And join the Out of the Desk conversation yourself at our monthly geek list at BGG. Alright, play me out, Tananda!